It's April 6, 1994, and two men plunge into the water. Their goal? To break the world diving record. But only one of them will ever return. They're going to the most extreme depths possible for a human, over 500 feet below the surface, a place where anything can go wrong in an instant, where it doesn't matter how much you practiced, how much you planned, or even if you're a world-class athlete, you can still fall victim to the most brutal, yet silent death in history. The Zacatón sinkhole, located in Tamaulipas, Mexico, with a depth of over 1,000 feet. It's one of the deepest water-filled sinkholes in the world. This depth had made it somewhat of an aquatic Mount Everest for many ambitious divers over the years, including renowned divers Jim Bowden and Sheck Exley, who was the first person in the world to log over 100 cave dives. At age 19, Exley and his younger brother competed to see how deep they could dive in the Wakala Springs, pushing the needle on a pressure gauge as far as it would go. Sheck's brother dove to 50 feet before he went limp and began floating down. He was pulled from the water and rushed to a hospital, but unfortunately did not survive, a fate that is sadly all too common in extreme deep diving. His brother's death didn't cause him to stop, though. Instead, it drove Exley to go deeper and deeper, chasing ever more extreme depths. To put it into perspective, your average diver is advised not to go deeper than 130 feet, or 300 feet for the highly trained and skilled. Exley, though, set his sights much higher, or rather lower. He planned to reach the very bottom of the Zacatón sinkhole, all 1,112 feet of it. A few years prior to his dive at Zacatón, Exley had shattered depth records by diving to 780 feet in the Mexican cave of Nacimiento Monte. This is also where he first met Jim Bowden, and the two became fast friends over their love of exploration. The two men had both been to Zacatón before. There was no strong current to be found and the area was easy to access, and in April 1993, Exley reached 721 feet, while Bowden reached 504. While Bowden and Exley realized the potential for Zacatón, it was as if they'd uncovered the most incredible treasure. This was, in their view, the perfect spot to smash a record and pass an unheard-of milestone, diving down 1,000 feet. To understand just how deep that dive is, diving to 1,000 feet is like descending the length of more than 3 football fields placed end to end. It would be an incredible feat, and the men vowed to complete their dive within the year. A year that, for one of those ambitious divers, would turn out to be their last. A year goes by quickly, too, and April 1994 soon arrived, which meant it was time for the men to see their dream fulfilled. The two divers meticulously prepared for their dive, which included their mixes of gas for the journey. When diving, the mixture of gas placed in one's tanks is crucial for survival. For recreational diving down to 130 feet, it's standard practice to use air similar to what we breathe on the surface, with 79% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. For dives beyond 130 feet, divers will use something called a trimix, a mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium. Common mixtures include 2135 or 21% oxygen, 35% helium, and 44% nitrogen, or 1845, which is 18% oxygen and 45% helium. For dives deeper than 197 feet, the amount of helium needs to be increased to reduce the risk of oxygen toxicity. This is known as a hypoxic mixture, and a standard mix for a depth of more than 300 feet is 10% oxygen, 70% helium, and 20% nitrogen. Even with a perfectly measured gas mixture in all of their tanks, the divers would need to breathe carefully in order to manage the amount of gas in their tanks and avoid running out as the pressure increased. And even the smallest change in the rate of one's breathing could throw off their calculations with deadly consequences. But they had trained rigorously for this undertaking, and now it was time to put their expertise to the test. Exley, Bowden, and their support team of Mary Ellen Eckhoff, Karen Hola, Anna Kristovich, and Marcos Gary gathered near the sinkhole. They were joined by members of the press, including a writer and a photographer from Sports Illustrated, a photographer from Destination Discovery, and a TV crew from Channel 7 News of Tampico. Even the owner of the land and his family had come to see the amazing feat achieved. Everyone watched as Bowden and Exley strapped on their gear and began to swim. They first passed from El Pasaje de Tortuga Muerta, a 600-foot passage leading to the dive site. The men surfaced and reached their respective descent lines. There was no turning back now. They would be diving together but independently. They remarked on the beautiful weather they'd been graced with, hopefully an auspicious sign, and they wished each other luck. It was finally time to break the world diving record. Bowden and Exley began to descend. They met each other's eyes nodding before entering a free fall down toward the bottom of the sinkhole. Exley had done everything he could to prepare himself for this dive. He'd been going to more and more extreme depths, but while attempting to explore an underwater cave at Bushmanskot in South Africa, he reached a depth of 863 feet before he was suddenly overcome with troubling physical symptoms. He experienced tremors, visual hallucinations such as flashing auras around people and objects, and other hallucinations. All of these were textbook symptoms of high-pressure nervous syndrome, or HPNS. HPNS can set in at a depth of 500 feet or more, and as divers descend below 600 feet, the risk of HPNS dramatically increases. HPNS is triggered by the speed of compression and pressure during a descent. The exact physical nature of HPNS is still up for debate, but it may be related to the compression of cell membranes in the central nervous system. At the depths that they were diving to, it could potentially be deadly if they weren't careful. Bowden had previously experienced HPNS on his dives as well, and the two men planned to strategically slow their descents in order to prevent falling victim to it again at this crucial moment. But even the best laid plans can go awry. Bowden's strategy for the descent was to fall at a rate of 100 feet per minute up to 300 feet using his air tank, then switching to Heliair, a mixture of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen for the next 600 feet before finally switching to his bottom mix for the final stretch. At around 750 to 800 feet, he would slow down, and that was where he had experienced HPNS symptoms on a previous dive. As planned, he slowed at the 800-foot mark, noticing a small tremor in his body. He could see Exley's light on in the distance. His friend had pressed on ahead of him, but they would see each other again at the bottom. At least that's what he thought. As he reached 900 feet, though, Bowden could no longer think about Exley. He checked his gas gauge and saw that something was terribly wrong. He was shocked to find that it had dipped to nearly 1,000 psi, when he had planned to have at least 1,800 at this point in the dive. If he didn't figure something out, and soon, he wouldn't have enough air to survive the decompression on the way up. He was suddenly in a life-and-death situation. When ascending from a dive, divers must carefully decrease their ambient pressure a bit at a time in order to reacclimate their bodies to the pressure changes, to dissolve any inert gases in their system. Without adequate decompression, nitrogen bubbles can form in the bloodstream, blocking vital blood flow to various parts of the body. Depending on the frequency of stops during the ascent and the depth of a dive, decompression can take up to 24 hours, time that Bowden absolutely did not have. Thinking quickly, he inflated his BCD wings, a buoyancy control device that fills with air, and stopped his descent at 925 feet. Then he switched to the tank of bottom mix under his right arm until switching to his travel mix as he climbed up to 450 feet. He assumed that Exley had continued descending toward the bottom of the sinkhole and that he would see him back at the top later. But Bowden wasn't the only one facing an unexpectedly difficult dive. At about 9 minutes in, when Exley was at a depth of approximately 879 feet below the surface, his vision began to blur and his body began to shake with muscle tremors. At this point, he had limited options. His most obvious course would be attempt an ascent, just as Bowden had when he realized his tanks were running low. But nitrogen narcosis, a daze-induced effect caused by deep diving as more nitrogen is absorbed into the blood, was beginning to set in. Its drug-like symptoms combined with tremors and dizziness made it difficult to think straight or orient himself in the water. In order to stabilize himself, he wrapped his descent line around his arms to hold himself in place and gather his thoughts. The stress of the HPNS symptoms caused him to breathe faster than planned, and he was forced to switch gas tanks. This only made matters worse, and the combination of physical exertion, hyperoxia, along with the nitrogen narcosis and HPNS, all combined with the dizzying effect of CO2 buildup. Joints locked in place, resisting movement, while it became harder and harder to form thoughts. His nervous system, eyes, heart, and lungs were all struggling to do their jobs while being pushed to the absolute limit. He may have tried to manually inflate his BC with compressed gas, but was unable to do so. He was trapped, 879 feet down with no clear way out, grappling with symptoms that included hallucinations, stiff joints, paranoia, and vertigo. And all the while, the air was running out. As Exley was struggling to hold on, Bowden was fighting a battle of his own. When he reached 450 feet, he found that his nightmare scenario had become a reality. Both tanks that he'd used to breathe were empty. The regulator for his gas tanks was failing, and his only option was to open and close the valve entirely and hope he could make it the 8 minutes of ascent between him and the next bottle of air hanging on his line. He ascended, minutes feeling like hours, never knowing if each breath would be his last. But as his arms reached out, he suddenly found that he had made it, and with his hands on a bottle that had a functioning regulator, he could breathe a little bit easier. But he wasn't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. It was now time to navigate the lengthy decompression period, while attempting to prevent oxygen toxicity and a nasty case of the bends. When he reached 130 feet, he was ready to relax a bit, knowing that he was almost in the clear. But at this point, he noticed something that had made his heart sink. He could see Exley's descent line, along with the fact that his bottles had gone unused. But maybe it was all right, he told himself. Maybe Exley had gone deeper than him, broken the record, and was still somewhere below, making his way back up. But while Bowden was unsure about what had happened to Exley, the support team on the surface could tell something was wrong. Karen Hole and Ann Kristovich could see a set of bubbles indicating that one of the divers had begun to ascend back to the surface. There was just one problem. There was only one set of bubbles. Kristovich, the team's medical officer and herself a record-breaking diver, who set the women's record at 554 feet, wrote on an underwater slate, "Where is Shek?" Mary Ellen Eckhoff wasted no time. She grabbed an extra bottle of gas mixture and told the others, "I'm going to 250 to look for bubbles." She dove all the way to 279 feet, where near Exley's line she saw two small white squares floating in the water. At first she couldn't be sure what they were. Then the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. They were laminated pages of Exley's dive profile, which he had used as a planning tool for his descent and ascent. She couldn't see him to confirm for sure, but she knew at that moment Shek Exley was lost down there, somewhere in the dark. Hola met Mary Ellen at about 100 feet. The other woman was on her way back up, and she was clearly distraught. Her eyes were filled with tears, mixing with the fresh water of the sinkhole, and her mask was off kilter. She expressed a desire to go back up to the surface right away to tell everyone what had happened, but it wasn't safe. Her gauge read 278 feet. With no other option, Hola took the other woman in her arms and held her in the silence of the water until 30 minutes had passed. Neither of them could remember a time when they felt so very alone, adrift in the deep with nothing but their grief and each other. Somewhere between 60 and 100 feet, Hola used sign language to tell Bowden what had happened. She couldn't find Shek anywhere. When they were back on the surface, they would have to mount a search for him. Unable to rush his decompression any more than he already had in the face of malfunctioning gas tanks, Bowden went through the motions in a numb, robotic fashion for the rest of the ascent. After nearly 10 hours in the water, Bowden emerged beneath a night sky and suffered his second case of the bends in his career. Kristovich treated him with a combination of intravenous steroids, anticoagulants, and painkillers, and by the next morning he had recovered from the physical wear and tear on his body, but not from the pain of losing Exley somewhere during the dive. He reached a depth of 915 feet, breaking the world record for open-circuit scuba diving, but at a devastating cost. As days passed, the team feared that they would never know what happened, that any answers were buried with Exley's body at the bottom of the sinkhole. But then, 3 days later, as the team began to pull up Exley's line, the unused decompression tanks and the other equipment, his body came with it, tangled up in the guideline. But the story wasn't over yet. There were questions only an examination of Exley's body could answer, tales only he could tell, even in death. His wrist-mounted dive computer read 879 feet. Exley's body was wrapped in the line, twisted around his arms, and the valves of his side-mounted bottles in a manner that seemed deliberate. It was possibly used to stabilize his position in the water. But there was an additional possibility floated by Bowden and the others. Perhaps, in the final moments of lucidity, Exley had wanted to spare his fellow divers the risk of a dangerous body retrieval attempt. Perhaps in those moments, he thought of his brother, whose body he had been unable to recover from the water so many years ago. Whether intentional or not, Exley made certain his colleagues and friends would be able to get him back and lay him to rest. Only Shek Exley knows for certain what happened to him deep in the darkness of the Zacatón sinkhole. The condition of his body provided few clues as to what had happened down in the deep. Though his mask and equipment were in place, he did not have a regulator in his mouth. His BC contained gas and his inflator was functional. The gas mixtures in his tanks had been accurately measured for the depth of the dive. There was nothing unusual found in the autopsy, suggesting that faced with the myriad stressors and symptoms plaguing him at that depth, Exley had simply not been able to get another regulator into his mouth. He had likely convulsed or lost consciousness and simply slipped away nearly 900 feet below the surface. The peers that Exley left behind that day could never know for certain what happened to him. They could only give it their best guess. They knew one thing for certain though, he would not have panicked. Exley had the coolest head they knew, and nerves of steel that allowed him to save numerous other divers over the years. Whatever happened, he was not afraid. The people of El Nacimiento and Higueron left a cross and flowers at the edge of Zacatón in the days following the loss of Exley, a simple memorial to a man who had treated the area with a deep reverence and respect. Though he was lost, Exley died doing what he loved most, exploring. In the words of Jim Bowden, "I do believe that we both were never more alive than in those moments of trial." He added, "I will miss him very much, but then we always dove alone anyway. Perhaps now he will be with me more than ever." And so we can only hope that in those last moments before he drew his final breath, Czech Exley truly lived. Now, check out the most brutal, painless death in history, sucked through a tiny hole. Or watch this instead.